The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and sank into the bones. A dense forest loomed in the background, its towering trees swaying under the faint glow of the crescent moon. 3 men stood in a small clearing, their faces masked by darkness, their breaths heavy with exertion. Before them, a deep hole had been dug in the damp earth, and beside it lay a wooden box, roughly the size of a coffin. Inside the box, a young woman trembled, her wrists bound, her mouth gagged with a piece of duct tape. Her eyes were wide with terror, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to scream, to thrash, but the ropes cut into her skin, and the gags stifled her cries. One of the men, a burly figure with a scar running down his cheek, wiped sweat from his brow and turned to the others. "We ain't got all night. Let's get it done." The second man, lanky and nervous, glanced around. "You sure she won't get out?" His voice wavered, betraying a hint of hesitation. The third man, the one with a cigarette dangling from his lips, chuckled. "You think she's Houdini? She's tied up, locked in, and about to be 6 feet under. Even if she was the devil herself, she ain't coming back from this." With that, the 3 men lifted the wooden box and lowered it into the grave. The woman inside kicked against the sides, her muffled screams barely audible. Scarface, as the others called him, grabbed a shovel and threw the first pile of dirt over the box. This is what happens when people stick their noses where they don't belong. One by one, the men shoveled dirt over the box, drowning out the faint thudding from within. The lanky man flinched at the sound but kept working. Within minutes, the grave was filled, the ground appearing undisturbed, as if no terrible crime had taken place. The 3 men stood in silence for a moment before Scarface lit a cigarette, exhaling a long trail of smoke. "It's done." They turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving behind nothing but an unmarked grave and the last, fading whispers of a woman buried alive. But the earth was not silent. Beneath the layers of soil, the woman struggled, gasping against the dwindling air. Her heart pounded as she tried to move, but the ropes dug into her flesh. Darkness enveloped her, thick and suffocating. The night stretched on, the forest breathing in hushed whispers as the wind danced through the trees. The freshly packed earth lay still, a shallow grave concealing a terrifying secret. Beneath it, in the cramped wooden box, the young woman's breath grew shallow. Each inhale felt like fire in her lungs. The air inside was vanishing, stolen by her own panic. Her name was Emily Carter, a 24-year-old investigative journalist. She had been following a story, one that had led her straight into the hands of those 3 men. She had thought she was careful. She had thought she was smart. But now, trapped beneath the earth, her mind raced with a single, undeniable truth: she was going to die. Emily's fingers clawed at the ropes binding her wrists. The rough fibers bit into her skin, but she refused to stop. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, her body drenched in sweat despite the chill of the grave. She wiggled, twisted, fought with everything she had left, knowing that if she gave up now, she'd never see the sun again. And then, a sound. Above her, the muffled crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Slow. Hesitant. Approaching. Panic surged through her. Was it them? Had they come back? Then, a voice. Low, gruff, but unfamiliar. "What the hell is this?" A pause. The sound of something striking the ground. A boot? A knee? Then another noise. The unmistakable scrape of fingers against dirt. Someone was digging. Emily wanted to scream, to bang against the box, but her strength was fading. The oxygen was nearly gone. Her head spun. The edges of her vision blurred. More digging. Faster now. Whoever was up there was frantic. Desperate. Then a thud. The impact of something striking the wooden box above her. Emily barely registered the faint sound of a latch being pried open. The lid cracked and a flood of cold, fresh air rushed in. Her lungs seized. The sudden rush of oxygen sent her body into shock. Her vision swam, her ears rang. Then light. Blurry. Faint. But real. The dim glow of a flashlight. A silhouette hovered over her, breathless. A man. Not one of them. He muttered something under his breath, eyes wide with shock. Jesus Christ. Emily coughed, her body convulsing. The gag slipped from her lips as she gasped, air burning through her throat. The man reached in, his hands rough but firm, grabbing her arms, pulling her up. Emily felt herself rising out of the grave, out of the suffocating darkness, into the cold, open night. She collapsed into his arms, her entire body trembling. Her mind screamed 1,000 questions, but her lips could only form one word. Who? The man's face was barely visible in the shadows, but his voice was steady. I'm Nate Parker, and I think I just saved your life. Emily's body convulsed as she gasped for air, her lungs desperate to reclaim what had nearly been stolen. Her vision was still blurry, her limbs weak, but she clung to the rough fabric of Nate Parker's jacket as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered to life. Easy, Nate murmured, his grip steady as he helped her sit up. You're safe now. Safe. The word echoed in her mind, but it felt meaningless. She had been buried alive, left for dead. And if this man hadn't found her, she would have suffocated beneath the earth, her body rotting in a nameless grave. The reality hit her like a freight train. Her breath quickened. Panic surged. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a hoarse rasp. Hey, look at me, Nate said, kneeling in front of her. His dark brown eyes locked onto hers, grounding her. You're in shock, but you gotta breathe. Slow and deep. Can you do that for me? Emily clenched her fists, forcing herself to nod. She inhaled through her nose, the air feeling foreign, too sharp. In. Hold. Out. After a few breaths, her mind cleared enough to take in her surroundings. They were still in the woods, the moon casting long shadows across the uneven ground. The disturbed dirt beside her was the only evidence of the grave she had just escaped. She turned back to Nate, really looking at him now. He was in his mid-30s, tall and rugged, dressed in a worn leather jacket and jeans. There was dirt on his hands and sweat on his brow, as though he had been out here a while. Who are you? She managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Nate exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short, dark hair. Long story. Let's just say I was in the right place at the right time. He glanced toward the trees. But we don't have time to chat. Whoever did this to you, his gaze flicked back to the grave, his jaw tightening, they might still be close. We need to move. Now. Emily's pulse spiked. The 3 men. The ones who had done this to her. She had seen their faces, heard their voices. If they realized she was alive, a fresh wave of terror gripped her. Nate must have seen the panic in her eyes because his expression softened, but his tone remained firm. Come on. Can you stand? Emily swallowed hard, nodding. She tried to push herself up, but her legs buckled beneath her. Nate caught her before she hit the ground. All right, he said, shifting to lift her. I got you. He hoisted her up effortlessly, carrying her as he started through the trees. Emily barely had the strength to protest. Her body was too weak, her mind still processing the fact that she was alive. As they moved deeper into the woods, Emily's thoughts spiraled. Why had Nate been out here? How had he found her? And most importantly, who were the men that had tried to kill her? Her memories were hazy, but she knew one thing for certain. They weren't finished with her yet. And if they found out she had survived, they would come back to finish the job. The cold night air bit into Emily's skin as Nate carried her through the dense forest. His movements were swift but controlled, his grip firm yet careful. Every step he took was deliberate, avoiding twigs and dry leaves that might give them away. Emily's mind reeled as she tried to make sense of everything. The last thing she remembered before waking up in that coffin was a warehouse. A dimly lit room. 3 men surrounding her. She had been following a lead, something big, something dangerous. And it had almost gotten her killed. She inhaled shakily. Nate? Her voice was still hoarse, barely above a whisper. Yeah? He didn't stop moving. Why were you there? A pause. Then, like I said, right place, right time. Emily wasn't buying it. People didn't just stumble upon graves in the middle of the woods. You were looking for something, she rasped. Nate exhaled as if debating whether to answer. Then he said someone. A missing person. Emily's breath hitched. Was he talking about her? Before she could ask more, Nate suddenly stopped. His body tensed. Emily's heart pounded. What is it? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lowered her carefully to her feet, bracing her against a tree. His eyes scanned the darkness. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Distant but growing closer. Panic gripped her. It's them, she whispered. Maybe. Nate's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a gun. Emily's breath caught. Who the hell is this guy? Nate turned to her. Can you run? Her legs still felt like jelly, but adrenaline was surging through her veins. She nodded. Then we move. Quietly. They crept through the forest, staying low. The footsteps behind them multiplied. More than one. The men were searching. A deep voice carried through the trees. She was buried right here. I swear. Emily froze. She knew that voice. It was Scarface. Another man cursed. Then where the hell is she, Vince? Vince. Scarface's real name. Emily's stomach turned. They knew she was gone. Nate nudged her forward. Go, he mouthed. They moved faster now, dodging between trees, ducking under branches. Emily's heart was racing, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Then a gunshot. The crack of the bullet shattered the silence. Bark exploded from a tree inches from Nate's head. Emily barely bit back a scream. Nate grabbed her wrist. Run. They tore through the forest, the sound of men crashing after them. More gunfire. Bullets whizzed past. The trees were their only cover, but how long could they keep this up? Emily's lungs burned. Her legs screamed in protest. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Because if they caught her again, she wouldn't be lucky enough to escape a second time. Emily ran as fast as her weakened body would allow, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her bare feet scraped against rocks and tangled roots, but the pain barely registered. Survival was the only thing that mattered. Nate stayed close beside her, his grip firm on her wrist, pulling her along whenever she faltered. The gunfire had stopped, but that didn't mean they were safe. The men were still behind them, hunting them. Keep moving, Nate whispered, his voice urgent but steady. Emily forced her legs to keep going, even as her body screamed for rest. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Then Nate suddenly yanked her to the side, dragging her behind a massive fallen tree. Get down, he hissed. Emily collapsed against the rough bark, struggling to quiet her breathing. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth as she heard them. Vince's voice was close. Too close. Find them, he snarled. She was half dead in that box. She couldn't have gotten far. Another voice answered. Maybe someone helped her. Vince cursed under his breath. No one was supposed to be out here. That grave was supposed to be her tomb. Emily's stomach turned. They weren't just trying to kill her, they were making sure she'd never be found. She dared to glance at Nate, who was watching the men through narrowed eyes. He held his gun low, finger on the trigger, his breathing slow and controlled. Who is he? Emily wondered. He had the instincts of someone who had done this before, who had been hunted, who had fought back. A third voice, deeper and more composed, spoke up. Vince, we don't have time for this. If she's gone, she's gone. We need to clear out. No. Vince snapped. You don't understand. If she talks, then we deal with it later, the deep voice interrupted. Right now, we need to move. Emily felt her pulse slow as the footsteps began to fade. They were leaving. She exhaled shakily, her body slumping against the tree. They were safe. For now. Nate waited a few moments before shifting, his muscles still tense. They're pulling back, he murmured. But they're not giving up. Emily swallowed hard. Who are they? Nate glanced at her, then sighed. I was hoping you could tell me that. Emily's mind raced. What did she know? She had been investigating something dangerous, she was sure of that. She had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. And now she had survived something she wasn't supposed to survive. She met Nate's gaze, her voice steady despite her fear. I think I just became a loose end. Nate nodded grimly. Then we better make sure they never tie it up. Emily sat with her back against the fallen tree, her body aching, her mind spinning. She had been investigating something big, but what? The details were still blurry, fragments of memories slipping through her grasp. Nate crouched beside her, his sharp eyes scanning the forest. We can't stay here long. If they regroup, they'll sweep the area again. Emily swallowed hard. We need to go to the police. Nate shook his head. Bad idea. She frowned. What? Why? He exhaled, glancing around before leaning in closer. You don't know who you're dealing with, do you? Emily shivered. I was following a story. I was close to something, but I don't remember what. Then let me fill in the blanks. Nate's voice was low, controlled. Those men? They work for Victor Langley. Emily's stomach dropped. That name. It sparked something deep in her memory. A powerful businessman. A billionaire with ties to something dark. She stared at Nate. How do you know this? Because I've been following Langley for years. Nate's jaw clenched. And I think you found something that scared him. Emily's heart pounded. If he's so powerful, why is he trying to kill me like this? Why not just make you disappear? Nate finished. Because a body can be found. A staged suicide can be questioned. But a buried corpse. He looked at her grimly. You were meant to vanish without a trace. Emily hugged her arms around herself. I don't remember what I found. But if they were willing to kill me over it, it must be huge. Nate nodded. And we need to get ahead of them before they try again. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Where do we go? Nate stood, offering her a hand. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't expect. Emily hesitated for only a moment before gripping his hand and pulling herself up. She didn't know if she could trust Nate completely. But right now he was the only thing standing between her and death. And she wasn't ready to die yet. Nate led Emily deeper into the woods, moving with a confidence that told her he had done this before, run from dangerous men, hidden in the dark, stayed one step ahead of death. Emily's legs felt like lead, exhaustion gnawing at her body. Every step was a struggle, but she forced herself to keep moving. If she stopped now, she might never get up again. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the thick tree line onto a desolate back road. The asphalt was cracked, barely maintained, stretching into the darkness in both directions. Nate glanced around. "Stay low," he muttered. Emily crouched beside him, shivering in the cold night air. "Where are we going?" Nate pulled out a small flashlight and clicked it twice in rapid succession. "Waiting for a ride." Emily's pulse quickened. "From who?" "Someone I trust." Emily wanted to push for answers, but before she could, the distant hum of an engine reached her ears. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, heading toward them. She tensed. "Are you sure?" "Relax," Nate said. "If they wanted us dead, they wouldn't be driving with their lights on." The vehicle, a black pickup truck, slowed as it neared, then stopped beside them. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a woman with sharp green eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "You look like hell," she said, her gaze flicking to Emily. "She's had a rough night," Nate said. "We need to lay low." The woman sighed, unlocking the doors. "Get in." Nate opened the passenger door, helping Emily inside before climbing in himself. As the truck pulled away, Emily turned to their driver. "Who are you?" The woman smirked. "Name's Lena Brooks. And if Nate dragged you into this mess, you must be in some serious trouble." Emily exhaled, slumping against the seat. "You have no idea." Lena drove in silence for a while, taking back roads, avoiding major highways. The longer they drove, the safer Emily felt until a thought struck her. "If I was buried alive," she said slowly, "that means they thought I was dead." Nate glanced at her. "Yeah. So if they're still looking for me?" Emily's throat tightened. "It means they found out I survived." The weight of that realization crashed over her. They knew she was still alive. "Which meant they'll never stop coming," she whispered. Lena shot Nate a look. "She's quick." Nate sighed. "Yeah. And that means we're running out of time." Emily clenched her fists. She was done running. She needed to remember what she had found before it was too late. The truck rumbled down the deserted road, the weight of silence pressing against Emily's chest. Her mind churned, trying to grasp the missing pieces of her memory. Nate and Lena spoke in hushed tones, discussing next steps, but Emily barely heard them. Her thoughts were elsewhere, back to the moment before she had been buried alive. "Think, Emily. What were you working on?" She closed her eyes, pushing through the haze of exhaustion and fear. Then, like a lightning strike, a memory surged forward. She had been inside a warehouse, a cold, damp space filled with the hum of servers and the click of keyboards. Men in suits, low voices discussing something classified. Emily had been recording them. Hidden in the shadows, her pulse hammering in her ears. She heard Vince's voice again, clear in her mind. "The money's been moved." Langley said the new accounts are untraceable. No one will ever find the missing billions. Another man had laughed. "And the witnesses?" "Handled." Emily's breath hitched. She had found proof. Proof that Victor Langley had laundered billions of dollars, shifting money through offshore accounts, silencing anyone who got too close. And she had been next on the list. Her eyes snapped open. "I remember." Nate and Lena turned to her, their expressions sharp. "Langley," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He's stealing money, laundering it through fake accounts, burying the evidence. I overheard everything. I had proof." She swallowed hard. "That's why they tried to kill me." Lena let out a low whistle. "Damn." Nate's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Do you still have the proof?" Emily's stomach twisted. I don't know." She had been recording that night. Had she uploaded the files? Sent them to someone? Her memories were still patchy, but one thing was clear, the evidence existed. And if she could find it, "They'll do anything to stop me," she murmured. Nate nodded. "Then we better make sure we get to the truth before they do." Lena smirked. "And maybe make those bastards regret not finishing the job." Emily's fear hadn't disappeared, but now it burned into something else, determination. They wanted her buried. but she wasn't going down without a fight. The truck rumbled along the empty back roads as Emily's mind raced. The proof was out there somewhere. If she could just remember where she had stored it. Her fingers trembled as she ran them through her hair. "I recorded everything," she said aloud, as if speaking the words would help solidify them. "I had audio, maybe even video. I wouldn't have kept it on me. I must have hidden it." "Think," Nate urged. "Where would you have stored something like that?" Emily squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself back into her own past. She saw herself in a motel room, her laptop open, her heart pounding. She had been frantic, knowing she had uncovered something too big to walk away from. Then a flash drive, a cheap one, bought from a gas station. Her eyes flew open. "I had a flash drive. I uploaded the files onto it that night." Lena let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's something. Where is it?" Emily's excitement dimmed. Where had she put it? She tried to remember, the details just out of reach. "I was on the run. I knew I couldn't keep it on me." A memory flickered. A cold counter, the clang of a cash register, the smell of stale coffee. Her breath caught. A diner. "I stopped at a diner before they got me." Nate exchanged a glance with Lena. "You think you hid it there?" "It's possible," Emily said. "I had to leave in a hurry. If I didn't have time to take it with me, I might have stashed it somewhere safe." Lena nodded. "That's our next stop, then." Nate checked his watch. "If they know you're alive, they might be tracking your movements. We have to assume they'll be watching the places you went before you disappeared." Emily's stomach clenched. "Then we don't have much time." Lena smirked, shifting gears. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll get there before they do." The truck roared forward, speeding toward the only clue that could save Emily's life and expose the men who had tried to bury her alive. But the clock was ticking, and her enemies were closer than she thought. The truck pulled into the empty parking lot of May's Diner, a rundown 24-hour joint sitting on the outskirts of town. A single flickering neon sign cast an eerie red glow on the cracked pavement. Emily's pulse quickened. This was it. Lena cut the engine. "You sure about this?" Emily nodded. "I don't remember everything, but I know I was here before they got me." Nate scanned the parking lot. "We need to be quick. If they're watching, we don't want to stay in one place for too long." They stepped out, the cold air biting against Emily's skin. She pulled Nate's jacket tighter around her, her bare feet aching against the rough ground. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A tired-looking waitress leaned against the counter, flipping through a newspaper. A lone trucker sipped his coffee in a booth near the window. Emily's eyes darted around, scanning for something familiar. Where would I have hidden it? Then it hit her. The bathroom. She rushed toward the back, her heart pounding. Nate followed close behind as she pushed open the door. The restroom was as grimy as she remembered. A cracked mirror. A rusted sink. A row of old stalls. She knelt beside the last stall, running her hands along the base of the toilet. Come on, come on. Then her fingers brushed against something. A piece of tape. Her breath caught as she peeled it away, revealing a small, dusty flash drive wedged between the pipes. Emily's hands shook as she pulled it free. I found it. Nate knelt beside her. Are you sure this is it? Yes. She clutched it to her chest. This has everything. A sudden crash echoed through the diner. They froze. Then gunfire. Bullets tore through the walls as the front windows shattered. The waitress screamed. The trucker dove under his table. Emily's blood ran cold. They found us, Nate growled, grabbing her arm. Lena's voice crackled through Nate's earpiece. 2 SUVs just pulled up outside. We need to move now. Nate pulled Emily to her feet. Run. They burst through the back door just as another round of bullets ripped through the diner. Lena had the truck waiting, the passenger door flung open. Move, move, move. Nate shoved Emily inside before jumping in himself. Lena floored the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as they sped away, headlights flashing in the rearview mirror. Emily gripped the flash drive so tightly her fingers ached. She had what they wanted. Now she just had to survive long enough to expose the truth.